You know what's funny about memories? Some fade like old photographs left in sunlight, but others burn themselves so deep into your soul that 34 years later, you can still smell the lilacs that were blooming outside your kitchen window when your whole world changed forever. My name is Evelyn Rose Patterson, and I've been carrying a secret for 34 years. A secret that's eaten at me through every birthday, every Christmas morning, every quiet Sunday afternoon when normal families gather around dinner tables and share their week. I've watched my children grow up and move away. I've buried my husband of 47 years. I've held my grandchildren and wondered what kind of world I'm leaving them. But through all of it, through every milestone and every heartbreak, this one summer keeps calling me back. It was 1990, and we'd just moved to Cedar Ridge, a little town about 60 miles west of Chicago. Harold had gotten a promotion at the insurance company, and we thought we were living the American dream. 3-bedroom house on Willow Lane, white picket fence, neighbors who brought you casseroles when you moved in. The house directly across the street had been empty for months when the Morrison family moved in. At least, that's what they told everyone their name was. I remember thinking they looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. Perfect clothes, perfect smiles, perfect children who always said yes ma'am and no sir when adults spoke to them. Robert Morrison worked downtown, something in banking, I think. Patricia stayed home with the children. They had 3 little ones, a boy who looked about 9, twin girls who couldn't have been more than 6. Those twins, they were the prettiest little things you ever saw, with identical blonde braids and these enormous blue eyes. Now, I want you to really listen to what I'm about to tell you, because I need you to understand how normal everything seemed at first. How easy it is for terrible things to hide behind Sunday morning smiles and well-maintained lawns. For the first few weeks after they moved in, everything was picture perfect. I'd see Patricia working in her garden every morning, the children playing quietly in the backyard, Robert washing his car every Saturday afternoon. They waved when we passed on the street, brought us homemade cookies, even invited us to their 4th of July barbecue. But somewhere around the middle of August, things started to feel different. Small things at first. Things you might not notice if you weren't paying attention. I started noticing that I never saw all 3 children playing together anymore. Usually it was just the boy and one of the twins, or sometimes just the boy alone. When I asked Patricia about it at the grocery store, she laughed and said one of the twins was just going through a shy phase, spending more time indoors. That should have been my first warning. Should have been, but you know how it is when you want to believe everything is fine. When it's easier to accept a simple explanation than to dig deeper into something that might be complicated. The first time I heard crying from their house, it was a Tuesday evening in late August. I was standing at my kitchen sink, washing dinner dishes, when I heard it through my open window. It went on for about 20 minutes, and it had a quality to it that made something twist in my stomach. It wasn't the crying of a child who'd fallen off their bicycle or been told no about staying up late. This was different. This was the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep inside. The kind that speaks of fear in a way that makes your maternal instincts scream. I dried my hands and walked to the window, listening more carefully. It was definitely coming from the Morrison house, from what I assumed was one of the children's bedrooms upstairs. But as I stood there, trying to decide if I should do something, it stopped as suddenly as it had started. I told myself it was probably nothing. Children cry. Sometimes they have nightmares. Sometimes they get upset about things adults don't understand. I went back to my dishes and tried to put it out of my mind. But it happened again the next week. And the week after that. Always in the evening, always lasting 15 to 20 minutes, always stopping abruptly. And I started to notice something else. On the days after I heard the crying, I would only see 2 children in the Morrison yard. The boy and 1 twin. Never both twins together. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just walk over there and ask if everything was okay? Why didn't I find some excuse to check on the family? And believe me, I've asked myself those same questions every single day for 34 years. But you have to understand what it was like in 1990. You didn't just go poking around in your neighbor's business. without a very good reason. Families handled their own problems, and getting involved in someone else's domestic situation wasn't something you did lightly. Plus, during the day, everything always looked so normal. I'd see Patricia at the mailbox, and she'd wave and smile like nothing in the world was wrong. I'd see Robert leaving for work in his pressed suits, looking every inch the successful businessman. The children I did see appeared healthy and well-dressed. So I convinced myself I was overreacting. I convinced myself that whatever I was hearing was probably just normal family struggles. Maybe one of the twins going through a difficult phase. Maybe some kind of behavioral issue that the parents were handling in their own way. But then came the night that changed everything. September 15th, 1990. I remember the date because it was Harold's 53rd birthday. And we'd had dinner at that little Italian place downtown. We came home around 8:30, and I was in the kitchen putting away leftovers when I heard it again. This time, it wasn't just crying. This time, I could make out words. A child's voice, pleading, begging in a way that made my blood run cold. "Please, Mommy, I'll be good. I promise, I'll be good. I won't tell anyone. Please don't put me back down there. I don't like the dark. Please, Mommy, I'm sorry." Down where I stood frozen at my kitchen window, every instinct in my body screaming that something was terribly wrong. This wasn't discipline. This wasn't a timeout. This was a child begging for mercy. I grabbed Harold's arm and pulled him to the window. We both stood there listening as that precious child's voice grew more and more desperate. Harold's face went white, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. "We have to do something," I whispered to him. "We have to call someone." Harold nodded, and I was reaching for the phone when the crying suddenly stopped. Not gradually, not the way crying usually stops when a child calms down. It just ended, like someone had turned off a switch. We waited by that window for another hour, but we didn't hear another sound from the Morrison house. No voices, no movement, nothing. It was like the whole place had gone dead. The next morning, I stood at my bedroom window, watching for signs of life across the street. Around 7:30, Robert came out to get the newspaper, same as always. Patricia appeared in her garden around 9, same as always. But I only saw one child leave for school. Just the boy, not both twins. I spent all day working up the courage to go over there. I must have started across that street 20 times, then turned around and came back. What was I going to say? What if I was wrong? What if there was a perfectly innocent explanation? But that evening, when I saw Patricia at the grocery store, I finally asked the question that had been burning in my chest all day. "Is everything all right with the girls?" I said, trying to sound casual. I haven't seen both of them playing outside lately. She looked at me with this strange expression, like she was trying to decide how to answer. Then she smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was cold, calculated. "Both girls," she said. "Oh, Mrs. Patterson, I think you might be confused. We only have one daughter. We've only ever had one daughter." I felt like the ground had shifted under my feet. I knew what I had seen. I knew there had been 2 identical little girls with blonde braids. But Patricia Morrison was standing there telling me I had imagined one of them. But I could have sworn I started to say, but she cut me off. "Memory plays tricks on us sometimes," she said, still wearing that cold smile. "Especially when we're getting older. I'm sure you understand." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing there in the cereal aisle, wondering if I was losing my mind. But I knew what I had seen. I knew there had been 2 little girls. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that child's voice, begging not to be put down there. Down where? What kind of place makes a 6-year-old beg not to be put in the dark? I started paying even closer attention to the Morrison house. I'd position myself by different windows throughout the day, watching for any sign of that missing twin. And sometimes, just sometimes, I thought I caught a glimpse of a small face in one of their upstairs windows, just for a second, then gone. But I never saw her outside again. Never saw her getting in the car. Never saw her playing in the yard. Never saw her walking to school. It was like she had simply vanished into thin air. The crying continued, maybe once or twice a week, always in the evening, always ending abruptly, and every time I heard it, I felt a piece of my soul die, because I knew, deep down, in that place where mothers keep their worst fears, I knew something horrible was happening in that house. I called the police one night in October. I told them about the crying, about the missing twin, about my concerns. The officer who came to take my statement was very polite, very professional. He said they would look into it. 2 days later, he called me back. He said he had spoken with the Morrison family, that they had been very cooperative, very understanding about a neighbor's concerns. He said they had one daughter, that they had always had one daughter, and that all their documentation supported this. He suggested, very gently, that perhaps I had been confused about what I had seen when they first moved in. Maybe the lighting had been different. Maybe I had seen the same child twice and thought there were two. Maybe my concerns were well-intentioned but mistaken. And just like that, my credibility was gone. I became the confused old woman who saw things that weren't there, who called the police on perfectly innocent neighbors. But I knew what I had witnessed. I knew there had been 2 little girls, and somewhere in that house, one of them was still crying for help. Winter came, and the crying became less frequent. Sometimes I would go weeks without hearing it, and I would start to hope that maybe whatever had been wrong had resolved itself. Maybe that little girl was okay. Maybe I really had been imagining things. But then, on a cold February night, I heard it one last time. Fainter than before, weaker, like whoever was making those sounds didn't have much strength left. This time, I didn't hesitate. I put on my coat and walked straight across that street. I rang the Morrison doorbell at 10 o'clock at night, not caring what they thought, not caring about being polite or proper. Robert answered the door, and when he saw me standing there, his face went through a series of expressions I'll never forget. Surprise, then recognition, then something that looked almost like fear. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, "is everything all right? It's rather late." "I need to know about the twins," I said, my voice shaking but determined. "I need to know what happened to the other little girl." His expression went completely blank. "I'm sorry, but I think you're confused. We have one daughter. We've always had one daughter. Perhaps you should speak to your doctor about these episodes you've been having." Episodes. Like I was having some kind of breakdown. Like the desperate crying of a child was just a hallucination brought on by old age and loneliness. I went home that night and cried until I had no tears left. Not just for that missing child, but for my own helplessness, my own failure to save someone who desperately needed saving. 3 weeks later, the Morrison family moved away. No for sale sign, no goodbye to neighbors, no forwarding address. They just vanished in the middle of the night, like they had never lived there at all. I've spent 34 years wondering what happened to that little girl. I've spent 34 years wondering if she's still alive, if she ever escaped whatever hell she was living in, if she ever found someone who believed her story. I've also spent 34 years wondering if there were others. How many towns did the Morrison family live in? How many neighborhoods did they fool with their perfect facade? How many children suffered because people like me didn't trust their instincts? But mostly, I've spent 34 years living with the knowledge that I failed a child who desperately needed help. That I let politeness and social convention and the fear of being wrong override my responsibility to protect someone who couldn't protect herself. I'm telling you this story now because I'm 81 years old, and I don't have much time left. But before I die, I need someone to know the truth. I need someone to remember that little girl who cried for help and got silence in return. I need you to understand that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who look the most normal. The ones who bring you casseroles and invite you to barbecues and make you feel foolish for questioning their motives. I need you to know that if you ever hear a child crying for help, you don't worry about being polite. You don't worry about being wrong. You don't worry about what the neighbors will think. You act, you call, you intervene. You trust that voice inside you that knows the difference between normal childhood struggles and genuine terror. Because somewhere out there, maybe that little girl is a woman now. Maybe she has children of her own. Maybe she's spent her whole life wondering why no one came to help her, why no one believed she existed. And maybe, just maybe, she'll hear this story and know that someone did notice. Someone did care. Someone did remember. If you're listening to this, sweetheart, if somehow this reaches you, I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder. I'm sorry I let them convince me you were just a figment of an old woman's imagination. You were real. Your pain was real, and you deserved so much better than the silence you received. I can't undo the past, but I can make sure your story is told. I can make sure people remember that you existed, that you mattered, that you were loved by at least one person who never forgot your cries for help. Don't let my story become your story. Don't let fear keep you from speaking up for children who can't speak for themselves. Trust your instincts. Trust your heart. Trust that voice inside you that knows when something isn't right. Because the children are counting on us. All of us. And we cannot let them down. This is Evelyn Rose Patterson, and I'll carry that little girl's voice with me until the day I die. But at least now, I won't be carrying it alone.